we are finally going to get into that update that I keep telling you guys about. I have lots of different things to update and tell you guys about, especially about the day gecko and the carpet python. So let's get to that now. So first things first, if my left eye looks bloodshot, it's because I accidentally shot hand sanitizer directly into my eyeball about half an hour ago. I went to squirt down on the plunger, and there must have been something coagulated in the tip, and it just shot a stream directly into my eye, which was really, really painful. But I kind of flushed it out, so now it's just a little bit red. So if you're wondering what that is why. A little bit embarrassing, but I guess it's one of the casualties of working with hand sanitizer in the reptile room. Anyway, this is a video I've been trying to do for a long time now. Every time I record an intro to a podcast, I keep saying I'm going to do an update on my day gecko as well as my jungle carpet python. And I'm actually editing a podcast right now. And then I realized, you know what? Stop editing the podcast and film this video so I can get this done and out for you guys. Let's start with the day gecko. So this is the new vivarium. If you did not follow along with the build, this vivarium has been up for about 2.5 months now, and things are starting to click in. You know, of course, there's lots of kinks you have to worry about when you first start a vivarium, and I'll talk about those. The gecko's doing fine. Hopefully you can kind of see her up there. I haven't changed much. The only things I really changed is one, I added a dripper system. So I bought the little dripper, I think it's Zoom Ed, just from Amazon. It's like $15, and it just drops maybe a drop of water every minute to 45 seconds or so. I just thought having fresh water throughout the day is good, or the option to have fresh water throughout the day is good. And a little bit of movement and some enrichment for her as well. So I haven't noticed her necessarily drinking off of the drops, but it's there for her if she needs. So that's one thing I changed. And I also changed the actual misting system. So I kept the same pump that I have. It's a diaphragm pump for a misting system for like your patio, for example. And it's so loud that I wanted to, insulate it in some way. So I went up and picked out just those classic 3-door drawers, and I filled the bottom drawer with water and then run a tube into the second drawer, which is where the pump is sitting. And I've sort of encapsulated the pump inside some foam. It's just some almost like seamstress foam that you might use for stuffing a pillow or something like that. So it's working pretty well now. I probably should have used opaque because you probably shouldn't have water sitting in a clear tub just due to algae buildup, but I haven't noticed anything. Luckily, that's underneath the table and it's in the shade all the time. So far that's been working fine. Those are the only 2 changes that I've made. Other than that, I've kept everything the way it is. Issues that I've ran into, the first issue was fungus gnats. If you have ever set up a new vivarium, this can be something that sometimes happens. They probably came in on some of the plants that I put into the vivarium, and basically a tropical vivarium is a perfect environment for a fungus gnat. It's moist, it's wet, it's dark, everything they need is there, and their population just skyrocketed after about 2 weeks. They were everywhere and super annoying, and there's still plenty in there. I think the population is starting to die down. Now, the idea is that once the cleanup crew and the isopods and the springtails are more established in the soil and the substrate, hopefully they start to outcompete the fungus gnats and they slowly disappear. But for now, I'm kind of dealing with them. You can't kill them. I mean, you can kill them, but you can't. There's actually one flying above the camera right now. These things are so annoying. You can't catch them like you can a fruit fly. For those of you that don't know what a fungus gnat is, they're just like a little fly. They're smaller than a fruit fly, and they're not attracted to those little wine traps that people use for fruit flies, or at least I haven't found them to be. But you can buy these little sticky yellow tapes. For some reason, they're attracted to the color yellow, and this is pretty gross, but they do collect on these. But catching the flies is only half the battle, because that's, once they've laid their eggs is when, the eggs are in the soil. So that's what's happening. But I went and picked up some more dwarf white isopods, and those are starting to, build a decent population. And I have ordered in some powder blue isopods, some bigger species of isopod, and I'm currently culturing them right now. They're actually right here. So I ordered them. I won't say from where because I don't want to, slam the company, but I think the weather was a little bit cold. So I ordered 40 of them, and basically 3 survived powder blue isopods. So I have this culture of 3, and they just had babies. So there's a bunch of little ones in here. So I'm trying to start a culture from basically nothing. And once they've established, I'll put them into a bigger container and give them more space. And then hopefully I'll have a bunch to eventually add into the terrarium. So that could be a sort of a long game at this point. But I had 1 female and 2 male isopods. So talk about genetic bottlenecking. But hopefully they actually are able to establish and go from there. So other than that was one of the main issues. Overall, it's been interesting watching the day gecko. There's some different behaviors that I've started to notice from her. She seems to love hanging out on the plants. Like she'll actually sleep upside down, like hanging inside the plants in the pothos plants and whatnot, which is not something I'd seen before. She seems to love these vertical branches. That's typically where she'll sleep, on one of the vertical branches or inside the leaves, like I said earlier. She's doing fairly well. Obviously she's an incredibly skittish gecko, so it took a long time for her to get going in this enclosure, and I still spoon feed her when I'm feeding her the crested gecko meal replacement powder, because she doesn't seem to know, or doesn't seem to get to the bowl yet. And this is sort of the same process I went through when I initially got her in a different enclosure. So it'll take time. It can take months for these animals to adjust to a new environment. Even right now, you probably can't tell, but she's a little bit dull right now in color because she's not a fan of me standing and talking right here. But for the most part, she's been pretty good. I can walk in the room and she doesn't skitter around anymore. So that's all good. The plants are finally starting to bloom, or starting to grow. I was really worried that they were all going to die, but just in the last probably week or so, I'm starting to see an explosion of plants. The bromeliads are starting to grow little pups. I really don't know anything about plants, but I know they're called pups, little offshoots of the bottom from the mother plant. I think that means the mother plant's going to die and then the small ones are going to take over. That could be wrong. I don't know. I don't care what happens with the plants as long as they're growing. I may start to trim them and whatnot if they start getting out of control, but I'm just going to let them grow. The umbrella plant's starting to send shoots out. And so that is all very good. I'm excited to see kind of how that turns out in the future once everything is grown in. So now that the gecko is settled in and she's comfortable and she's eating and everything, I'm a lot more relaxed. She's changed positions, so now she can keep an eye on me to make sure I don't do anything sketchy. So she's a lot more relaxed in the enclosure now. She's behaving normally, which is great. That means I can kind of have a sigh of relief in a lot of ways, because if you've put a new animal in a brand new enclosure, there's always that first few weeks that are very scary because you don't know how they're going to react. Now with her, I actually had a health scare to the point where I thought she was going to die, which made me feel terrible. And it had nothing to do with the enclosure change, but it was just at the same time, so it's more coincidental. But I wanted to tell you guys this to make sure that other people can learn from the mistake that I made. So I started noticing strange behaviors from her a few months ago, and I really should have done something sooner about this, and I didn't. So this is my mistakes here. Luckily, I caught it in time. But she was starting to exhibit what looked like hypocalcemia, like symptoms of hypocalcemia. So they were you couldn't really notice it, like the average person couldn't notice it. I know this animal really well, so I was noticing things. Like once in a while, she would do like a shudder, like almost like a shiver, but it was very subtle and not consistently shivering. It would just be like one shudder. And sometimes her legs looked like they weren't moving properly, and I was really scared, and I didn't understand what was happening, because her diet is I would feed her crested gecko diet, the Pangea, with insects and fruit, as well as phoenix worms. That's mostly the only insect that she'll eat. But mostly she was eating Pangea, which is tons of people feed their day geckos only Pangea. This is one of those things that I'm going to now warn you about, but it's something that you see all the time. Breeders saying these are insect-free geckos, and I never thought that. I always wanted to mix in insects, which I did, but that wouldn't have saved me in this situation. So I'm watching her, and then I put her into this new enclosure, and there's definitely a lot of stress, and she was still behaving weird. Like I still see her move weird sometimes she looked okay. And I was also noticing that she wasn't gripping as well. If you listen to part 4 of my video of the build, you hear me say that she's having trouble climbing, and I thought it was due to her going through a shed, which it was, but there was also, after she shed, she was still not gripping as well as she had gripped in the past. All these are signs of low calcium, which made no sense to me for 2 reasons. 1, she gets lots of calcium, and 2, her calcium glands, her endolymphatic sacs in her neck are very full to the point where it's almost looks wrong in a lot of ways. And so that kind of ruled out low calcium. And the next thing is low vitamin D. I have brand new lights. She shouldn't be developing any signs of metabolic bone disease, which is what it was looking like to me. But then, so I started doing some exploring and asking around and asking people who breed crested geckos, like, why are those glands so big on her neck? And, half the day gecko population or community will say those are totally fine. That's a healthy looking female. And the other half says, we won't see those in the wild, so it must be something. I didn't know what I was doing wrong until somebody let me know it's too much vitamin D. And then it clicked. the Pangea food has synthetic vitamin D, and obviously they are producing their own vitamin D from the lighting, the UVB lighting. So over the last 5 or 6 years of having her, I've slowly been giving her essentially hypervitaminosis with too much vitamin D, which has caused her to over metabolize calcium and continuing to build her neck, the sort of calcium stores in her neck, which has probably saved her up until this point. And now I'm guessing those essentially filled to the point where they couldn't fill anymore, and it was starting to dump calcium back into her blood. And that's where I learned from John Courtney Smith's book. If you don't have this book, I recommend getting it. He was on my podcast. John is an incredible mind to pick. But in this book is where I realized that hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia have almost the same symptoms. They manifest in the same way. So what I thought was hypocalcemia was actually hypercalcemia. So that's everything started to click. I realized I need to stop giving Pangea. So as soon as I noticed that, this was like the early October, which was about 2 weeks after moving her into here, I cut that food out completely. So thankfully I have Arcadia's Sticky Foot Gold, which is a food that Arcadia makes, and it doesn't have synthetic vitamin D. The thing is she's not a huge fan of it yet. Getting her to switch to it was very difficult. So, and the other thing is she's very picky. She doesn't eat a lot of insects. I bought her as a 4-year-old adult from a breeder who only fed her. She didn't feed her Pangea, she fed her Repashy Super Mango. So very similar to the Pangea food, and it made this gecko very picky when it comes to insects. So I tried to go like straight to crickets, good, healthy, gut-loaded crickets. I got her to eat 2 of them, and I had to throw the rest of them out because she wouldn't eat them. And now I have a mealworm and superworm set up here, and she's actually taken to those. So she'll eat a couple superworms. I know mealworms and superworms are not the best, but it is better than nothing for one. And I think a lot of those old mealworm, superworm wives' tales, like the not being able to digest the chitin and biting through their stomach and whatnot, most of those have been busted. Even in this book from John, he says that although mealworms maybe are not the best feeder, the chitin that we were so worried about may actually aid in digestion rather than impact digestion, which is one of the fears that we had previously in the hobby. So anyway, to make a long story short, she is doing a lot better. The symptoms of seeing that hypercalcemia pretty much dissipated within a week of pulling the Pangea off of her diet. She started moving normally, and after about a month and a half, now she moves totally fine. I'm wondering now if those neck glands are going to start to decrease in size. I have no clue. Maybe if you have an idea, maybe it will. I don't want to restrict her calcium really. I mean, I've been giving her this Earth Pro A, which is a mixture of a bunch of, calcium and mineral clay and whatnot. And this is a really good supplement to give. So I dust the insects in that and mix that in with her Pangea, or her Sticky Foot Gold meal replacement powder. So she's starting to eat that. We're gonna make that for her today, and maybe I'll feed her a superworm as well, so you guys can see her eat a superworm. I'm basically feeding her one day and then giving her 2 full days off of food and then feeding her. So she eats 2 to 3 times a week. She's eating fine. She's pooping. Her appetite is good. It was very scary. I'm very glad I missed it. This would have absolutely killed her. I have no clue if there's permanent damage on an organ level, but she's doing much better now. So if you are somebody that has UVB and is providing synthetic vitamin D for a diurnal animal, I would highly recommend stopping that. Find a food that doesn't include synthetic vitamin D, like Arcadia. I think there's a few others that do that. I think it's Black Panther. I'll put it in the description. I think there's one called Black Panther as well. That could be way off. It's something Panther, I think, in the States, and they also have a food without synthetic vitamin D. And that brings me to my crested gecko as well. With the crested gecko, I do have UVB, and he's eating Pangea, although he doesn't spend nearly as much time under the light as her, and it's a weaker UVB, so I'm not as worried, although I am slowly trying to shift him to the Arcadia, but he's picky as well. But if I would say, especially for diurnal species, animals that are sitting underneath UVB all day, do not give them synthetic vitamin D, because hypervitaminosis will happen. And for me, I caught it in time, but again, I don't know what damage this would have caused. So why don't we feed her, now that we have the bad news out of the way? Let's feed her. We'll give her, I'll give her, you know what, let's make this food. I'll show you guys how I make it and how I'm kind of tricking her into eating it. And then we will feed her a superworm as well. And then I'll show you how I spoon feed her. So the little trick that I've been using to get her to lap up some of this food is using banana. So it's a trick I've used in the past. I think banana just has a very strong smell, so it just promotes them to eat. So we're gonna use this. And again, the reason that I wanna make sure that I'm feeding this as well is because this this sticky foot gold diet has a lot of extra nutrition, minerals, vitamins, bee pollen, tons of additional things that I won't get from superworms or mealworms. So I want to still get her to be eating this a few times a week if I can. So just take a little powder there, and I'll add this mineral powder, which is good. This actually has bee pollen in it as well. Just a little bit, just like that. And I need just a touch of water. Normally I wouldn't feed her both items, the diet and insect, on the same day. You should just alternate, but for today we'll just see if she'll take both. So we'll start with the superworm. So one of the things I do with the superworms is I just give them a little spray down of water just to make sure that to try to get that bee pollen to stick a little better, or the calcium and bee pollen to stick a little bit better. So now he's a little wet, chuck him in here. A little spin. These guys have very slippery skin, so nothing really sticks to it unless you wet them, I find. So there we go, he's covered. And I put him in this little container. And I don't like tong feeding her because these little superworms I drop all the time because they're so slippery. So I think I've done a good job of kind of freaking her out by walking around too much and talking in front of her. You can see her foot just hanging out on that side. See if I can... She usually knows that this container means worm. Oh yeah, she sees it. You know what? We're gonna tongue feed her because she's upside down and I can't get her to... Hopefully you guys saw that. I know you can barely see her because of that light. It's not the best feeding video. Alright, now that she's in a little bit of... Let's see if we can get her to... She might not take this right now. Oh, there we go. Okay. I was just about to say she's in a really awkward position to spoon feed, but let's see if we can get her to... There we go. And like I said, I've been feeding her like this because she's not been great at going to find the food on her own. And because I was so worried about her health-wise, I just accepted it. Like typically I'll just let an animal, get hungry enough to go find the food because they can really go a while without food. But for her, I just wanted to kind of baby her a little bit until I knew she was doing better. And she does really like that banana smell, so slowly I'll phase out the banana just so I'm not giving her as much sugar. But for now, this is good. And I will leave the meal in her enclosure in case she goes and does end up finding it. So from that camera angle, you can see how large her endolymphatic sacs are. And I've seen pictures of female geckos with them this big, and I do think there must be something genetic. Some animals maybe don't over-synthesize their calcium even with too much vitamin D. I think it all depends. She's just one that seems to. Her sacs have always been very large, but like I said, I got her as a 4-year-old, and they were that big, pretty much that big when I got her, I think. They were definitely big when I got her. So this is something that's been building for a long time. And she usually does that when she's done. She'll do a little bit of a backup move. So I'm going to leave this in her cage. So I just put it right here. And then she can eat it from up there. There we go. And also, for those of you who are curious, here's my mealworm colony, which is essentially now just a darkling beetle colony. There's, where are these guys? There's a bunch of beetles down there. So hopefully those guys will breed for me. I've never bred mealworms before, so I don't know if I'm doing everything right, but hopefully. And these are my superworms. And again, she's not just solely on a diet, a staple diet of mealworms and mealworms and superworms. Of course, I'm mixing in the Sticky Foot Gold as well as Arcadia Insecti Gold. That's not a product I showed you guys today, but I highly recommend checking it out. It's just sort of a gelatin powder using black soldier fly larvae with a ton of vitamins, minerals, bee pollen, additives. So super healthy. So between those 4 things, I think she's gonna have a really stable and good diet away from synthetic vitamin D. And I'm excited about that. So, and again, I think a lot of those mealworm myths that we used to fear about are kind of busted for the most part, but she is not just eating mealworms. She'll eat probably a few a month type thing. So let's go check out the carpet python. So as I was editing this video, I felt like I may have raised more questions than answers when it comes to vitamin D hypervitaminosis. So if you are interested in learning about that, I'll talk about it really quick here for 2 minutes. If not, just skip to one of the stamps below and head to another animal. So of course, we all know about metabolic bone disease. I'm not going to get into that at all, but that is caused by low calcium or low vitamin D or both. And vitamin D hypervitaminosis is sort of the exact opposite. So one, you're supplying too much vitamin D, which in turn causes the animal to start to almost overdose on calcium. In other words, they're hypercalcemic, which means they have way too much calcium in their blood, essentially. So one important thing to note is you cannot cause hypercalcemia by giving your animal too much calcium. Hypercalcemia only happens when the animal has too much vitamin D. Excess calcium with an adequate amount of vitamin D is just excreted through their body. So as long as they're getting normal and appropriate amounts of vitamin D, any excess calcium just dumps through their body, which is good. The issue happens when too much vitamin D is added to the system. And too much vitamin D to the system can only happen from adding synthetic vitamin D to an animal's diet. So an animal cannot overproduce vitamin D on UVB lighting. So if your only source of vitamin D for your animal is through UVB lighting, you have nothing to worry about as long as you're keeping up to date with fresh light bulbs every 6 to 12 months or whatever the manufacturer recommends. So if that's what you have no problems. Animals cannot overproduce vitamin D. But if you are providing synthetic vitamin D in something like this with a calcium supplement with vitamin D additive, you can run into risks of overdosing on your vitamin D. So if you don't have any UVB lighting, you have to be providing vitamin D, of course. There's different supplements. Some calcium comes with vitamin D, some not. So I think some people alternate. Some days they give calcium, some days they give calcium plus vitamin D if you're not using UVB. So that's fine. The issue happens is when you're using both like I was. And I was inadvertently using both because I was not even really aware that the Pangea had synthetic vitamin D in it. I was not thinking. That's totally my fault. And I'm glad I was able to learn from this, and hopefully you guys can as well. So if you're somebody who has UVB lighting and are providing either synthetic vitamin D through a meal replacement powder, or you're dusting insects with something like this with synthetic vitamin D, you should stop doing that. You should analyze how your animal's getting vitamin D, and then you should make the adjustment if needed. So again, if you're just using lighting and that's your only source of vitamin D, you're in the clear as long as you stay up to date with your changing light bulbs. So hopefully that clears up some of the questions around hypercalcemia if I raised any earlier on. Calcium is obviously an incredibly important mineral for body function, for cellular function and muscle function, and having it out of balance is incredibly dangerous. I'm sure eventually it will lead to kidney stones and probably kidney failure. I assume that's just me speculating, but again, it's not something you want out of balance. And again, the only way to get it out of balance is by providing too much vitamin D, which can come from synthetic vitamin D. And you also have to watch some, cricket and insect gut loading pre-made mix. A lot of them do have synthetic vitamin D in them as well. So I think this is the hobby still sort of adjusting to UVB being on the market. Still, there's a lot of people, some people even keep day geckos without UVB. They just give them synthetic vitamin D. Of course, I always recommend going to UVB. So I think right now we're kind of stuck between UVB is coming on the market, and we have a ton of products that have synthetic vitamin D because we were trying to get rid of metabolic bone disease, and now we have this overlap. So if just analyze what you're doing. Maybe I'm the only person making this mistake, but hopefully I can save a couple other people from making the same mistake. So let's go check out the carpet python, but before I do, I want to show you guys these amazing tags that I got from a company called Cloud Forest Design. I found them on Instagram. I will absolutely throw them a link in the bio. These are so cool. I have one for each animal. I think I only paid $5 American for each one. So they're very, very cool. So I highly recommend going to check them out. If you want to spruce up your reptile room, definitely get one of these tags. they just did an amazing job designing them, and they're also cool for when people come and visit. So I know I don't often show off my animals. I'm not a pet tube channel. I don't like necessarily showing off all the animals that I have, because I don't want someone to feel like they want an animal just because I have it. They think it's cool. I want people to go out and do the research. I'd much prefer someone listen to the podcast and get inspired to have a reptile rather than seeing one of my animals on screen and go, oh, I definitely want one of those. So that's one of the reasons I don't do crazy tours and everything. But I thought I do have a couple cages to clean later today. So maybe at the end of the video, I'll pull out my Brazilian rainbow boa as well as my Sonoran desert boa, the hybrid boa. And you guys can take a look at that. So if you're interested in that, stick around. But before we do that, let's talk about the jungle carpet python. So you're not going to be able to see him. I do have footage of him from this morning when he was out, so we can take a look at that. I'll cut that in. And let me consult my little piece of paper to make sure I cover everything that I want to cover. So I put this little carpet python, he's probably 2 feet long, and I think the thickness of about a Sharpie pencil or a Sharpie permanent marker, in this enclosure in May. And sort of what I was claiming was that you can put a small snake in a large enclosure and you're not going to overwhelm them as long as the setup is correct. So definitely go check those videos out. I did a podcast on it as well. That full explanation there, I'm not going to get into it, but lots of people are interested in how he's doing. How is the snake adjusting to the new environment and whatnot? So to answer very quickly, he's doing great. He's doing absolutely fine. I've had no issues with this enclosure or with him in this enclosure. He's been eating, he's been moving around, he's been using the entire enclosure. Right now he's in his bottom hide, in the warm hide, because he just ate yesterday. But I've had no complaints about it so far. I did run into some humidity issues. I had to sort of block off some of the vents because now that it's winter, humidity has dropped down to about 10% relative humidity inside the building that I'm in. So now I need to do a little more misting as well as restrict ventilation a little bit. Other than saying that he's healthy, he's climbing and he's eating and growing, there's really not a ton more to say about him. I will say a few things. Feeding him was tricky at the beginning because this was a very picky snake. When he was in his tub, his sterile paper towel tub, he ate probably like 70% of the time, but 30% of the time he would just leave the rodent on the ground. And I found the only way I could successfully get him to eat was by turning off all the lights, feeding him at nighttime, and covering a towel over the tub so it was super dark and quiet, and he would eventually come along and eat it. But he never struck and he never coiled the prey when I'd offered it to him. He was almost scared of it. And so that was a challenge in this enclosure, but now he's gotten a lot better. He now strikes and coils the prey, which is great to see. He's acting a little bit more natural. I think he's just kind of going through a learning process, shifting away from realizing that the rats or the mice are there to eat, not to be scared of. There was definitely a learning curve though, because one of the annoying things and one of the failures that I had getting him to eat quite often when he was first in here was he spent a lot of time in the top canopy. He would strike and coil the food, but he was terrible at eating it while it was wrapped in his coils because he was so used to eating it in the tub when he could just rub it against the floor and just eat it that way. So many times in the beginning, he would drop the prey from the top and it would hit the floor and he would never go down to find it. He seems to be very sensitive to heat, so he likes the prey to be quite warm, and that's what sort of elicits a strike. But once the thing drops and it cools off, he never finds it again. And maybe if I had let it sit in there, he'd eventually go find it, but I would quite often come back in the morning and find the prey on the floor and him sitting up in the canopy where I fed him. So that was annoying. That was really annoying. And it took him a while to learn how to eat. And now it's no problem. Now he can eat well in the trees, which I think is just an added behavior for him. In the early days, I would take advantage of the times that he was in his hide and I'd feed him in his hide so he couldn't drop it. But now, no problem. He coils no matter where he is and he eats it without a problem. So that's been great. It was stressful at first, but no problems now. He's got very predictable behaviors. He's rarely out. Well, I shouldn't say he's rarely out in the day. In the daytime, he's always sleeping. So either he's up in the top canopy on the warm side or he's in his hide. And he'll go through these patterns of behavior where for like 3 or 4 weeks, he'll just do the exact same thing. So for a while, he would coil up here in the corner, and then at night, he would stretch it across this branch. And then as soon as the lights come back on, he would coil in the corner, lights turn off, stretch out. And now his little mode, whatever he's doing now, is he goes down into his bottom hide in the evening, or in the morning, and then he'll come up and he'll coil on this branch and he'll kind of let his body dangle. And I'm hopefully showing a video now of him doing that from this morning when the lights turn on, and he just hangs out there. Throughout the night, he seems to explore, but then he goes back to these favorite spots that he has. And I took a video of him this morning. As soon as the lights came on, about 5 minutes later, he crawls back into his hide, and you can see there's a big lump in his belly because he just ate a meal last night. So I'm really happy with this. I think he's got a lot of growing to do. He can grow out in this tub a long ways. He's looking great. He's shed out a few times in here. So for those of you that were worried or wondering how he's doing, how the small snake is doing in this large enclosure, he's doing fantastic. Oh, and the other thing that I had to personally change was because this enclosure is so big, it is a pain to get him out of here. I'm still trying to work with him, and he's not aggressive, but he doesn't ever want to come out. So all these climbing branches mean that when I'm trying to get him out, he grips and he hangs on to everything with his dear life. So one of the things that I've had to change is I have to be a little bit less concerned about constantly weighing him. With my other snakes, every time they defecate, I pull them out and I weigh them, and I just have a logbook for it. For him, I really had to stop doing that because it's just too stressful to be pulling him out every time he goes. So now periodically I'll pull him out and I'll weigh him, but I don't stress over it. I keep track of how much he's eating, and then every opportunity I get to weigh him, I'll take it, but I'm not going to go crazy and rip him out of there just to get a weight on him. So that was the only downside of this, but really it's not a downside. I've had to just kind of loosen up the way I care for him. But anyway, I'm really happy with this. I recommend everybody, if you want to try go for a big enclosure, you can do it. You just have to make sure it is set up in the way that's appropriate to the species you're caring for. So this is one of my boas. Now he is a male. He's 4 years old, just over 4. And this is how big he is. He's a small male because he's actually 50% Sonoran desert boa. So I think his parents were both 50-50s as well. So 50% Colombian, 50% Sonoran, which means he's essentially, quote unquote, one of the dwarf species of boas. He's very small. And I think if you were to read Vin Russo's new edition of his book, which is the Complete Boa Constrictor, or the More Complete Boa Constrictor now, they actually have reclassified the Sonoran desert boas from Boa Imperator to Boa Sigma, I think. So it's kind of a cool name. So technically this is a 50% Boa Sigma, 50% Boa Imperator. And he, of course, will grow a little bit through the rest of his life, but you can see he is a very small boa, extremely well-tempered. He's really hungry right now, so he's happy to explore, but not aggressive at all. So in terms of some of the differences between a Sonoran desert boa and a regular Colombian boa, there's just some difference in pattern. Of course, size is a big one, like we already talked about. Let's see if I can, it's tough to film by myself and hold a snake who doesn't want to stop moving, but the pattern itself looks a little bit different. He's overall a lot darker than a Colombian boa. Look how dark his tail is. It's almost, these patches are very dark brown with a little bit of red, rather than a little bit lighter than you might see in a Boa Imperator. The actual pattern, the saddles on his back do look a little bit different than the average Colombian boa. He is het for leopard, so I think the het leopard does have some visual markers, which does change the pattern a little bit, so I've been told, but he won't be bred for that anyway. So, but he's a great little boa. This was my first snake. This is what got me into the snake hobby, and I've always really enjoyed this guy. All right, here is the Brazilian rainbow boa. And again, of course, the camera does not do this girl justice, and there's not enough lighting in here to really show her glow. She looks better under the lights in her enclosure, but so this is Brazilian rainbow boa. She's about the same age. I believe she's 4 or 5 years old as well, so she has a little growing to do, but she's not gonna grow too much bigger. These are relatively small snakes when it comes to, boas. Of course, 6 feet will kind of be a max for them. I love the colors on this animal, even the colors without the rainbow appearance, that sort of deep orange, the really cool pattern. She's a little bit more flighty than the other boas that I have, so she's not as easy to handle, but she's not aggressive at all. As you can see, she's tying me up right now. Let me see if I can avoid having her wrap herself around the tripod. So her enclosure is a 4-foot long enclosure. I do want to upgrade her enclosure as well. Of course, the humidity factor with Brazilian rainbow boas mean you got to be a little bit tighter on that. And she has a ton of leaf litter, which I've recently added. Some almond. I guess she wants to go back in. Let's let her go. As you can see, In the wild, they love to hang out under leaf litter, so she likes hanging out under there. Dave Kaufman has some really amazing videos of catching wild Brazilian rainbow boas, and you can find them under leaf litter. So I have these almond, what are these called? Almond tree leaves, I believe, and then magnolia leaves as well as some oak leaves that I've collected on my own. But that is that snake. It's a really cool animal. I don't take her out a lot because she doesn't really love being handled, but an awesome species to look at. People that come over love looking at her. All right, that is way more animal showing than I normally do on this channel. Typically I'm building stuff or recording podcasts, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Again, that's not something I'm gonna do very often, but because I was doing the video already, I thought I would. I will catch you guys in the next video.